Good morning, everyone. My name is Doreen Diadamo. I'm Vice Chair of the State Water Board. Today is Tuesday, May 7th, and I would like to call this meeting to order. I'll begin by introducing our board members and staff. With us today are my fellow colleagues, Board Member Sean McGuire, Board Member Laurel Firestone, and Board Member Nicole Morgan. And with us today are staff, our Executive Director, Eric Oppenheimer, our Chief Deputy, Karen Mogus, Chief Counsel, Michael Loffer, and Clerk to the Board, Courtney Tyler, and Assistant to the Clerk is Margie Argel. Now I'll go through our emergency evacuation procedures. Please look around and identify the 2 exits closest to you. In the event of a fire alarm, we're required to gather up our valuables and evacuate this room immediately. We are to evacuate to Cesar Chavez Park, which is across the street. Please obey all traffic signals and be careful when crossing the street. I also want to let you know that this meeting is being webcast and recorded, so when it is your turn to speak, please say your name clearly into your phone or on your computer if you are remoting in, or the microphone at the podium in the meeting room. We will be conducting today's board meeting with both a physical meeting location and an option for the public to participate from a remote location. For people who only want to listen or watch the meeting, the board's customary webcast is available. We are receiving presentations and public comment through a Zoom meeting platform, as well as in the physical meeting location. If you intend to present or comment or think you might be interested in commenting, you should already be in the Zoom meeting room using the meeting ID provided on the board's website and the password you received from the clerk. Also, at the front of the meeting room by the clerk, there is a computer to sign in to make public comment. If you've not already received a password, you can email the clerk now at board.clerk@waterboards.ca.gov, and she will email you a link to sign up on the virtual speaker card list. For those in the Zoom platform, you will be on mute and your camera turned off until it is your turn to speak. The clerk will then unmute you and ask you to turn on your camera if you have one. When you're finished speaking and the board members have completed asking questions, you will be placed on mute and your camera turned off. And then please be sure, everyone, to turn off all cell phones and any other noise-making devices that could otherwise interrupt this meeting. And before we start officially with our agenda, I'll just note that we do have an agenda item for closed session, and that will not be occurring today. Now, to start our meeting off, we have a Superior Accomplishment Award for the Upward Project Team. Mr. Ekdahl, will you please present the award? Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Vice Chair Diadamo, members of the board. My name is Eric Ekdahl, Deputy Director for the Division of Water Rights, and it is my sincere honor and privilege to present a Sustained Accomplishment Award to the Updating Water Rights Data for California, or Upward team, along with Kathy Owen, the Chief Information Officer for the Division of Information Technology. A bit of background on the Upward project itself. The Upward team was formally created in 2021, but the groundwork for Upward and the concept goes back years or even decades earlier, going into the 2013 to 15 drought and even the original formation of ERIMS, our current system. Beginning in July of 2021, the board was allocated an initial investment of $30 million to modernize its water rights data management system. With the initial Upward funding, the board was allocated also 12 new positions. These staff were focused on the design, creation, and implementation of a complete overhaul to how the board administers its water rights data. Ultimately, the end product is a map-based system where you can find all the water rights information you possibly need at the same place and at the same time. It includes scanning documents, over 7 million physical documents, 4 million existing electronic documents, all of which are going to be merged together, fingers crossed. Down the road, the product will also merge diversion data and other kind of basic water right information into a one-stop map-based shop. Some of these documents are more than 100 years old and include maps that are taller than I am. And so it's a large endeavor, and there's a lot behind the scenes even to get to that digitization scene or digitization work and put it all together. The 12 PY were hired and onboarded over the course of a few months after July 2021. Sometimes they're often pulling from existing staff that were already part of the board. They had been working on data management and oversight for a long time, but this gave them a formal role and structure to work and to focus the work that they'd already been pioneering on in their respective units and positions. Some staff, on the other hand, were brand new to the board, coming from outside agencies or even the private sector. But regardless of their origin stories, every single member of the team jumped in as fast as they could. And through truly remarkable collaboration efforts across water rights, IT, the Division of Administrative Services, and the Office of Delta Water Master, we've accomplished some pretty significant achievements. I wanted to run through a couple of them really quickly, and then we'll actually get to the awards. Within 2 months of receiving the funding, we had executed and fully finished a contract for $5 million to bring our consultants on board. We developed a scoping team that began putting together the request for information and other contracting elements. Within 6 months of funding, had issued a formal contract scoping document, and within 7 months of funding, initiated a novel procurement process called a challenge-based procurement with the California Department of Technology. We ran the challenge-based procurement. We executed a contract getting the full kind of integrator on board, Deloitte Consulting. That contract is now in place. It's on schedule and aiming towards an April 2025 release of the new system. On top of that, drafted another budget change proposal for another $31 million to finish the system. So the total allocation is now $61 million. And staff actually designed a novel document tracking and digitization process using QR codes. And so we know where every document is, whether it's in the file room or through the scanning process, and we can find it and track it. So far, we've scanned in over 120,000 pages. So with that, that doesn't come anywhere close to capturing the long days, hours, emails, weeks that go on and on every single day. And so it's my sincere pleasure to present these awards to the staff. I'll read through the water rights, Delta Water Master, and DAS staff, and then I'll turn it over to Kathy for the DIT staff. So as I call your name, please come up and we'll hand you the form. Let's see, first up, from the Division of Administrative Services, Naila Malik. Next up, from the Division of Water Rights, Stephen Severon. Stephen is our digitization lead. Next up, from the Division of Water Rights, we have Jennifer Hernandez. Jennifer is our organizational change management lead. Next up, from originally the Office of the Delta Water Master, but now we stole her into the division, Lindsay Kameyer, who is the ODM liaison slash Delta ACP expert, amongst other things. Next up, from the division, we have Tyler G., who is our logistics and planning lead, imagery and GIS data support liaison. Next up, we have Andrew Hill from the division. Andrew is our machine learning lead, and I am using my notes to make sure I get all of their titles and workload descriptions quite right. Andrew's responsible for developing Canavision and the machine learning tools that can identify things using computer images. Next up, Jacob Pasner in the Division of Water Rights. Jacob's our data design specialist. Next up, we have Jeff Parks. Jeff is referred to as the Upward product owner and plays a supersized role in pretty much everything. We would not be here today without Jeff working incredible hours and taking a really amazing lead throughout this whole process. Thank you, Jeff. And last up from the division side, Brent Vanderberg, who is the Upward project director. Again, Brent's work goes back years before Upward funding, and we also wouldn't be here without him today. So I'll turn it over next to Kathy.
Thank you, Eric. To begin with, I'd like to call out a couple of staff who, although they are not dedicated, they were called to do this in addition to their regular workload. So first of all, I'd like to bring up Cheryl Holden, her official. Cheryl's official position on the team is contract manager and procurement lead. The truth is that she's amazing at building relationships and ensuring that all our I's are dotted and all our T's are crossed, enabling us to meet all of the Department of Technology requirements, and there are a lot. I frequently tell Cheryl that she is my unicorn because no matter where she falls, she does an excellent job. But there are many days where cat herder would probably be a better description. Thank you, Cheryl.
Thank you, Kathy.
Next up, Jeff Capellas. Jeff is responsible for GIS design and integration support for the Upward project. Jeff is the Grand Master of GIS with a startling depth of knowledge for program areas as well. Thank you, Jeff. Now on to the dedicated team. Kieran Casaretti. So Kieran's official position is Upward Project Technical Director. Without her skills and technical knowledge, this project would not be where it is today. She and Jeff Parks move mountains every day. Thank you. Next up, John Carrata. John? No? Okay. John is the IT side GIS integration lead. And John works with Jeff Capellas to make our dream of a map-based, visually integrated system a reality. Next up, Janelle Medina. Janelle's official position is the IT side data integration lead. Janelle is the data architect for Upward. He has master level technical skills and a deep understanding of Water Board's programs and data. He converts legacy data and endeavors to make sure we'll have quality data moving forward. Thank you, Janelle. Alex Talpan Sanu. Alex is the Upward Enterprise Architect. With a keen eye for detail and vast technical knowledge, Alex has kept us on the straight and narrow, ensuring we are getting what we pay for and keeping the vendor on their toes. Next up, Misha Matsunami. Misha is Upward Project Management and Integration with Contract Management Support. Misha is responsible for budget tracking and reporting expenditures for the many reports that are required by the Department of Technology and the Department of Finance. He frequently runs us down to get everything he needs. Thank you, Misha.
And I am remiss, due to my robust tracking system, I forgot to announce one of my own staff, Sanjeet Singh, who is here today and is our Salesforce integration lead. Sanjeet, please. This one. We'll make it look good. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd also like to thank my co-sponsor, Eric Ekdahl, because one of the main reasons that IT technology projects fail is lack of sponsor involvement. So I really appreciate having somebody on the other side of the fence who supports us and keeps us moving forward. Thank you all.
Okay. Well, let's get everybody up here for a photo. And I just want to say a few things. First of all, we're so excited to see you all here today. And you can sense the enthusiasm that you all have for the project in supporting each other. This is one of our top priorities. We think that this is going to allow us to better administer the complicated and confusing water rights system. And we sense the enthusiasm also from the public as we're out and about talking about this project. And so thank you all for your work. We know there's a lot more to come. Thanks. I know, we should, because this is.
Like in a bad way.
Okay, guys, it's rough, but okay, we're gonna do it. All right. All right, I got 1, 2, 3. Okay, and let me more power. Okay, 1, 2, 3. All right. Okay, hope we got it, guys.
Okay, now we're on to the next item, which is public forum, and we'll be hearing from any person wishing to speak about any matter that is not pending before the board. And looks like we have one commenter, Ray Tahir with TECS Environmental. Is he signed up? Is he on the platform?
Yes, and Mr. Tahir, you've been unmuted and we can see you partially if you want to try to center up your camera. Mr. Tahir, we cannot hear you on the Zoom platform. And I know we had this issue one time before when you joined on the Zoom application on your computer. If you go down into the lower left corner where it has the little microphone and the audio, there is a little, what's called a caret. It's a little up arrow that's just to the right of that, and it lets you select a different microphone. Right now, we're not hearing you when you speak. So if you click on that arrow, you may see additional options for speaking, such as a microphone in your camera or a microphone actually on your laptop, or if you're using a headset, you might be able to select that as well.
Can you hear me now?
You're very faint, and I'm wondering if it's a microphone that's in a headset that's picking you up. Is there something you can move closer to your mouth that might pick up the audio better?
No, I don't think so.
I think we can hear you, and it's possible that our AV folks may be able to dial in the volume a little bit, at least for those of us here in the hearing room.
Okay.
So go ahead, Mr. Tahir.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. All righty. Next slide, please. As mentioned at the State Board's February 4th meeting, RB4 did not fully comply with the requisite, let me get this out of here. The requisite lines of monitoring data to seeding, the purpose of which is to screen out data that did not meet seeding criteria. One critical problem is that the outfall monitoring data was not excluded, despite the fact of being required by seeding. It appears that the results may have been used, or the possibility that may have been used, to determine exceedances necessitating placement of pollutants on the 303D list or removal from it. More serious, however, RB4 did not report water quality objective exceedances in its data submittal. In the results column, it reported monitoring results for various pollutants, but did not report water quality objective exceedances. As a result, there is no justification for 303D listings or delistings, especially toxics. And I'll show this on the next slide. Next slide, please. So here you go. If you go to the results column, you see the monitoring results for various reaches within the LA basin. But what is conspicuously absent next to result is the water quality objectives and whether or not they were exceeded. Another issue is that if you look under fraction N rather, you'll see for copper, using the term total milligrams per liter. Total does not, the total really is a total recoverable. Total recoverable criterion do not apply to copper, which is a metal. It only applies to non-metal toxics. Next slide, please. Water quality objectives and water quality standards were not established in accordance with the California Toxics Rule. Nevertheless, the metals TMDLs for various LA water boards, LA watersheds erroneously claimed that they were. This includes the LA River, San Gabriel River, Dominguez Channel harbors, Los Cerritos Channel, and Bayona Creek metals TMDLs. Here's an example from the LA River metals TMDL. You can see that on table 2, it says water quality objectives established in TTR and CTR. Values in this table are based on a hardness value of 100 milligrams as calcium carbonate. And metals values are reported as micrograms per liter. Next slide, please. In reality, CTR does not establish water quality standards or water quality objectives. It only provides a methodology to calculate them. For example, the chronic freshwater objective for copper was calculated based on the formula for total recoverable, 9.3 micrograms, which was then converted to the chronic dissolved metals criterion, which resulted in 9 micrograms. And this will be shown on the whiteboard calcs that I did, which is on the next slide. There's also a formula for calculating acute freshwater objective. It's my understanding that the freshwater acute criterion determines the water quality objective. However, the 303B ID fact sheets use chronic criterion versus acute. So there's some inconsistency and disagreement there that needs to be resolved. So the question is, why wasn't the water quality objectives and water quality standards properly established? Several reasons. First, these results are general. They can be applied throughout the state and nationally through the National Toxics Rule. Second, they need to be site-specific to each water body. This requires a water effects ratio calculation, which has not been done. Third, none of the water quality standards or water quality objectives went through a basin planning process, as required by Port of Cologne Section 13241. Note that Chapter 3 of the water quality objectives of the basin plan does not list any toxics. Technically, water quality objectives and water quality standards do not exist despite being required by 13241. Next slide, please. Okay, here's just the whiteboard caps that I did that confirms what's in CTR. Next slide, please. Lastly, because water quality objectives are invalid, the TMDLs on which they are based are also invalid. Remember, it is the frequency of water quality exceedances that determines whether a water body is impaired and the need for a TMDL. You need to see the state policy on developing TMDLs to fully appreciate this. Against this background, the state board should reject RB4's 2024 integrated report submittal. By the way, I will send a more detailed letter on the subject to both the state board and to RB4. In the meantime, I think some action needs to be taken to inform permittees that they may not be in compliance, because there's no water quality objectives. Oh, by the way, whereas The feds use water quality standards. The state uses water quality objectives. And that's it for now. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Tahir. We appreciate the PowerPoint, and we'll look for the letter that you'll be submitting. All right, next we have Mike McCullough. Oh, I should pause for a moment. Are there any questions? Okay, next, Mike McCullough with Monterey One Water. Good morning.
Morning. How are you? Vice Chair, members of the board. Can you hear me? All right, all right. Monterey One Water, Director of External Affairs. Many of you know that our agency has been providing recycled water for agriculture for over 25 years. And as of 4 years ago, we developed the Pure Water Monterey project, which is an indirect potable reuse project. And we're currently under expanding that project as we speak. And so that project will be online at the end of 2025. And when it does, that will provide our area a healthy, locally controlled, drought-resistant source, producing over half of the Monterey Peninsula's drinking water. So we're really excited about that moving into the future. Monterey One Water and many of our colleagues across the state want to thank the board for its leadership in making potable reuse an option for all Californians. Together, we've made tremendous progress towards the critical statewide water recycling goals. And as recycled water agencies partner with state and regional board staff to permit and commission potable reuse projects throughout California, the challenges of implementation come into better focus and call us to action. Excuse me. With that background, I'm super excited to inform the board about a grassroots effort that we started to help bring clarity and efficiency to a complex regulatory question. And that question is, how do we know recycled water is healthy and safe for its intended use? The reason that question is so important is that by solving this, it will not only propel the water industry forward towards achieving the recycled water goals outlined in the governor's water supply strategy, the question also builds upon the fantastic work that the Water Board has already completed by providing utilities and the state with critical support to assist those on the front line of project implementation, like Monterey One Water. Without these projects, the governor's goals will remain just out of reach. And while there's now a regulatory path in California for all the various forms of potable reuse, the project sponsors' road to securing permitting and operating these projects remains complex because it requires significant time and resources to implement those. As Pure Water Monterey was implementing our project, we had some of the most experienced scientists, engineers, operators throughout the state, but we were surprised by the amount of time and effort it took to complete the process for validating the treatment processes, whether it's objectively or quantitatively, as we were trying to produce safe and healthy water. And so during this time of validation, I asked a state board staffer if a uniform template for determining treatment credits would help in the permitting process. Would it speed it up? And the staffer said, absolutely. So that got me thinking. So then I thought, well, I'll ask a well-respected industry professional the same question. And that professional said, undoubtedly, a uniform template would be helpful. And they also noted that this process was used in the past. And so with that concept, in less than 2 years, the idea of a uniform guide for treatment credits for IPR in California, which we are now calling CalVal, went from an idea to fully developed and now underway with a highly respected project team. So an initial phase 1 led by the National Water Research Institute is focused on compliance with California's established IPR regulations. We've received overwhelming utility and industry support. We're trying to focus on documenting the experience and approaches taken to date, along with research and knowledge gaps to bring definition to the fully project scope. And this project scope, we're just in phase 1. It's going to require millions of dollars to complete this, and it's probably going to take more than 5 years. So, this is kind of the long term. So as we sit here today, CalVal has 26 utilities supporting it, along with 2 nonprofits. One of them is, which is California Water Reuse. We've generated over $270,000, and we have leveraged those dollars to get a match from our friends at Water Research Foundation, with a match to fully fund phase 1, which we would define a rational, prioritized, and peer-reviewed scope moving forward. So what this support does is it expresses a shared perspective that a pragmatic, technically based validation guidance for IPR treatment system is crucial for multiple complementary projects seeking to achieve state, regional, and local water recycling goals. In addition to the overwhelming support we've received across the state for CalVal, our team has also been collaborating with our international partners, specifically our partners in Australia. A small group of CalVal team members were in Australia last week discussing a similar process for validating reuse technologies. Australia is a key partner, as their water validation, or where they call it WaterVal, involves state of California regulators in their program and provides a framework upon which CalVal program will build upon. Leveraging all that experience, we know for certain that CalVal can only realize its full potential if we collaborate with state, and our entire CalVal team is committed to working collaboratively with the state and regional boards to ensure our efforts help California invest confidently and safely in these water reuse technologies. This project will only be successful with the full support of the Division of Drinking Water and the State Water Board. You know, in closing here pretty quickly, I should also note the highlight that the CalVal team has been in contact with many of the State Water Board staff and has expressed interest in taking steps forward to assist with this CalVal effort. The Water Board has made great progress with its water recycling strike team, and we want to build upon that success by helping remove any obstacles or knowledge gaps that prevent us from achieving the governor's state water supply goals. The CalVal Consortium understands how vitally important this work is, and we're ready to provide unprecedented funding and other supporting resources to develop the CalVal IPR roadmap. We think that this roadmap will assist California regulators, and will assist utilities, industry professionals, and community leaders in their quest to timely and confidently move forward in developing the essential water supply projects needed throughout the state. To this end, we think the project will be tremendously benefit to the state in meeting the recycling goals, and potentially a contribution to help the research effort seems to be like a reasonable step forward. You know, many of the communities in our region really value recycled water, and they see that as a part of their viable supply in the future. And, you know, we think these communities deserve clarity, and the CalVal is a path forward in providing that clarity and helping also meet the governor's goals. So we just want to thank you for the time and just want to introduce this concept to the board. And we look forward to providing additional updates, and hopefully our other partners will do that as well. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to inform us of this, and we look forward to future updates. Thank you for your leadership in Monterey, and we look forward to being invited to the ribbon cutting, you know, in 2025. So I'm glad to hear that you are talking to the strike team, because that as you were clicking through many of the different aspects of this, I think it's important to integrate with the team that is working on these issues more globally. So want to turn it over, see if there's any questions. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Now we have moving on to item number 2, uncontested item. This will be taken up and voted on unless there's a request for it to be removed from the uncontested item calendar. And I understand that there is just one change to the title that needs to be read into the record. Mr. Lawfer.
That's correct. So on item 2, The title for the resolution presently reads, authorizing the executive director or designee to apply for and accept grants for underground storage corrective action. There should be a tanks inserted or a tank inserted after storage and before corrective action, so that it would read grants for underground storage tank corrective action, and then continue on and leak prevention and to execute a cooperative agreement with the United States Environmental Protection Agency, Region 9. That change does not require taking it off consent.
Right. All right. So would anyone like to make a motion?
I'll make a motion to move item 2 with correction right into the record.
A second.
Right. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Board Member Morgan. Aye. Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye. And with that, item 2 is adopted.
Vice Chair Diadamo, I
I'm
don't know
seeing
if you
that I
want to take
missed
the
the
minutes.
It's a good thing that the second vice chair is here. Okay, I neglected to bring up the minutes. So going backwards now to item number 1 that I missed, we'll consider the minutes from April 16th, 17th board meeting.
I'll make a motion.
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Board Member Morgan.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire.
Aye.
Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
And Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Right, with that, the board meeting minutes are adopted, and now moving on to informational items. We'll start with hydrologic conditions and response update. Good morning, Ms. Bean and Ms. Forgazi.
Good morning, Vice Chair, board members. I'm Jessica Bean with the Division of Water Rights, and I have Erin Ragazzi with me today. So we'll do a brief presentation for you, and we'll go ahead and get started. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to jump into our traditional slides that we're used to seeing here, which is showing the precipitation in the dark blue line, and then you have your average precipitation in the light blue area there. And so we're about the same as we were at our last meeting. For the Northern Sierra, we're at 96% of average. Next slide, please. For the San Joaquin area, we're at 88% of average. Next slide, please. And then we are at 85% of average for the Tulare area. Next slide, please. All right, and in terms of the snowpack, we're at about 100% of average, 99% of average statewide for this time of year. If you take a look here, it's 119% in the northern area, 96% in the central Sierra, and then 79% in the southern Sierra. And that is down about 13% statewide from the last board meeting. Next slide, please. In terms of our reservoir conditions, we are also kind of about the same as we were before. Everything is at or above historical averages. And for our select south of Delta reservoirs, you can see here that Kachuma, again, about the same as last time, 133% of average. Diamond Valley is 119% of average. And then San Luis is 85% of average, very similar to what we saw a couple of weeks ago. Next slide, please. It is worth noting that we have seen an increase in the water project allocations from both the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. So DWR released their projected allocations to 40% in April, and that's up from 30% in March. And they're attributing that to Lake Oroville storage as well above average. Looking at the above average information from the April 1 snow survey, and then the spring runoff projections right now are also looking at above average. And then for the Central Valley Project, the allocations increased in March based on what was released in February. The percentages there depend on the contractor category, so there isn't just a general percentage to give. Next slide, please. And I'll pass this over to Erin.
Thanks, Jessica. Good morning. So now turning to Scott Shasta. This past weekend's precipitation resulted in increased flow in both watersheds, which you'll see in the hydrographs I show in just a little bit. No curtailments are currently in effect. Dwinelle Reservoir is at about 73% above what we saw in 2023 and 2022. A little update on snow course. In the Scott, they do a May soil course measurement. In the Shasta, they do not. So in the Scott, we have an updated snow water equivalent of 99% of May. That was published on May 1st, so it doesn't represent the increased snow that we saw over the past weekend on the 4th and the 5th. And so the latest measurements we had on the Shasta are 116% of average compared to April. Just to compare what that was on the Scott, that was 117% on the Scott for April. So next slide, please. So here we've got the graph of the Scott River that you've seen previously. Blue represents the flow that we've seen. The green bars are precipitation. You can see increasing flow when we have those precipitation events. In some cases, we are now also seeing warming where you'll see increased flows associated with snowmelt. Flows are well above the flow requirement, which is shown in the red bar. As of 6:30 a.m. this morning, flows at the Fort Jones gauge were 1,130 CFS. Next slide, please. So moving on to the Shasta River watershed, again, we're seeing, as you see, precipitation events, large increases in the flows there. As of 6 a.m. this morning, we had a flow of 214 CFS at the Wairika gauge. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to do a brief overview of the groundwater local cooperative solutions and where we're at in that program. Proposals were due by April 15th. We received 43 proposals from 36 applicants, so quite a bit of participation coming in. You'll see that the predominant type of local cooperative solution is the 30% reduction, which is the same one that was offered as part of the original regulation, and that was used predominantly for almost all groundwater wells in the Scott in 2022. So about 77% of the groundwater irrigated acres are proposing to enroll in the groundwater local cooperative solution program. Last Friday, we posted general information, so the applicants, the type of local cooperative solutions and the acres on our webpage. Yesterday, that was supplemented for 17 of those applications with additional information. If you'll recall, there's a provision in the regulation that states that the board will make those that information available in general at least 7 days in advance of making a decision. So we also did send out a LIRIS list email yesterday, or email subscription list yesterday, letting folks know that we've posted some of that information in case folks want to take a look. And that's all I have at this time, unless there's any questions.
Thank you for that update. Any questions?
We have a few more slides after Scott Shasta, and then we can. Okay, so for the groundwater piece here, the Department of Water Resources just released their spring 2024 semi-annual groundwater conditions report yesterday. It includes GSA annual reported data from 99 basins. This is the first time we've had that information. And just some of the highlights in there, there's 4.1 million acre feet of managed groundwater recharge was reported in 2023, the water year. There's an increase of 8.7 million acre feet in groundwater storage across the basins, and that's attributed to the 2 wet winters that we've had. But it's worth noting, and the report notes that long-term storage still remains at a pretty large deficit of 40 million acre feet, just from decades of overpumping. So it's great to see the increase in groundwater storage, but just recognizing we also still have a long way to go. Just to note, in terms of our groundwater recharge temporary permits at this point, nothing has changed since the last time we issued I believe 10 permits were in effect for this water year, authorizing over 100,000 acre feet of diversions. We have not seen any flood recharge diversions reported at this time. Next slide. In terms of the water rights annual reports, we've seen a few more, relatively speaking, in terms of the reports filed. Last time we spoke, we were at 33% had not reported. Now we're down to 31% have not reported. So, ticking down a little bit. Next slide, please. If you do look at the breakdown here, again, your largest diverters over 100,000 acre feet annually are down at the bottom. So we're at 16. I believe we were at 21 last time. So that's good that we're seeing those, but 16 is still a lot of diverters, accounting for quite a bit of diversions. So really hoping to see a greater number of folks submit their reports and come into compliance. As you'll recall, we did issue some notices of violation on April 8th. So we're going to be coming up on the 30-day period for that. We did give folks the ability within that 30-day period to comply without penalties. And then after that, we'll move into another phase, and we'll also be posting information online once we get through that period, which is going to be wrapping up very soon. So you'll see some movement going forward on that. And I believe that wraps up our presentation for today.
All right, thank you for that. Any questions? So I did have a question. You said that you'll be posting, what's the date that you expect to be posting on the reporting?
On the notices of violation, they were going to wait until after the 30 days to see if folks came into compliance. That's coming up on the 8th, but there's always mailing issues that occur. So I think it's going to depend on how those all fell out. I don't know the specifics. I can certainly talk to our enforcement folks and get back to you on that. But it's not always when we issue it. We need to make sure that folks received it, and there's kind of a process for that. But I will talk to them and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And then I had a question regarding the local cooperative solutions and the interest at the 30% reduction, which is very similar to what, in terms of numbers, what we saw in the last round. We did also receive, I'm not remembering at which workshop, but we received some concern by some of the stakeholders following this and interested in the flows that as to compliance. Is there anything about the current program that has changed that would help to facilitate compliance once an individual does sign up?
And when you say to facilitate compliance, do you mean their potential of being curtailed? And
no, what I mean is if they've agreed to 30% to ensure that in fact the reduction is occurring. Is there anything about the way the program is structured or about the way you all are tracking things so that we can be responsive to the concerns that were raised about whether or not those reductions actually occurred?
Great question. We did make some changes to the regulation relative to the 30%. So one of the changes that was made is we established baselines. So we took what we believe are appropriate baselines generally, right? They're averages. It will vary depending on soil types and other types of things, what you have on your land. But we developed for alfalfa, grain, and pasture specific baseline amounts for applied water. If folks want to propose something higher, then they have to provide justification and support for why they think they need a higher baseline from which they're reducing to 30%. They also, that baseline is established based upon specific year type. So they could choose 2022, 2021. But we did put that baseline as an additional measure to make people think about whether or not what they're choosing as their baseline is appropriate. Additionally, I think the bigger overall change was that as part of groundwater local cooperative solutions, there's a requirement to have metered data. And so we're working with folks on their metering plans right now. And I think that's going to be actually the best in terms of giving us real data about how much it takes and how much water is actually being applied to each of these fields, regardless of whether it's the best management practice, cessation, or 30% reduction. So I think we'll have better data moving forward on which to base a reduction. once we have that meter data.
Great, that's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions? Board Member Wakar.
Yes, thank you as always for the update on the report and hydrologic conditions. And just a personal note, I drove up into the Sierras over the weekend and experienced about 2 feet of snow. And read after there was the largest storm of the year actually, and it occurred in May. So what a surreal time that we live in, really, and unpredictable, right? And so it's great that we have the snow, and on the other hand, it just shows us how we need to continue to be vigilant with our resources because we don't know when they're going to appear. But it's all good there. My question is actually though on the other side, which is groundwater. And thank you for that update. I hadn't seen that report yet on the groundwater conditions. It's very interesting information to see that, and especially the amount of groundwater recharge that the basins reported. I was wondering if you know, or if you've had a chance to dig in enough yet to see whether it discussed or presented information on groundwater levels as well. I've been hearing anecdotally a lot of recovery and water levels increasing quite a bit. So just wondering if they compiled that information in the report.
So the report was just released yesterday, so I certainly haven't had a chance to dig into it as much as I'd like to. But we would like to have DWR come and talk to you about that if that is of interest, and work that out in the near future. We have to do some coordination on it, but I think that it would be most effective to have them come and share what they have with you, and you can ask your questions.
I would be very open to a general update and conversation with DWR on the work that they're doing there, especially we're doing a lot of work now with individual basins that are critically overdrafted, but having this statewide picture of groundwater conditions is really helpful. And I think having a discussion with them could be very useful and informative to everyone. Thank you.
Good suggestion. Anyone else? So I'm realizing I had an additional question too on slide 12, the groundwater recharge temporary permits. It'd be great if we could receive information. That's what's authorized, 133,000 roughly, but to receive information about the report that you get back in terms of the amount of acre feet actually diverted. Just recalling that just because the authorization is there doesn't mean that the window of opportunity will be there to actually do the diversion. Okay, thank you so much. And we don't have any commenters on this item, right? All right, now item 4, we'll move on. Thank you so much, Ms. Bean and Ms. Grazi. We'll move on to item 4, recycled water research program update. Good morning. Ms. McClellan, you'll lead up.
Good morning, Vice Chair Diademo, members of the board. We have a large crowd with us today. We're very excited to share with you an informational item on our recycled water research program. So actually leading our presentation this morning is going to be a member of my staff, Cindy Figueroa, who's an environmental scientist in the Division of Water Quality. So I'll hand it over to Cindy and she can introduce the team.
Good morning. Good morning, Vice Chair and members of the board. Again, my name is Cindy Figueroa. I'm an environmental scientist and I manage our recycled water research program. And today we're going to be sharing the update on the successful completion of one of our grant agreements with the Water Research Foundation. This grant funded 20 projects to advance potable and non-potable reuse in California. And we're so excited to tell you what this research has accomplished. With me today, also from the Division of Water Quality, Laura McClellan, Claire Wagner, Annalisa behind us. And this will be a joint presentation, so allow me to introduce the Water Research Foundation's team. Please welcome Dr. Peter Gravatt, the Chief Executive Officer for the Water Research Foundation, Mr. John Albert, Chief Research Officer, and Mrs. Julie Minton, Research Unit Leader. Next slide. I will be starting today's presentation with an introduction on the State Water Board's recycled water goals and progress made to date. And then I'll provide a refresher on the mission and funding background of the Recycled Water Research Program. From there, I'll hand it over to Dr. Gravatt to discuss the Water Research Foundation and our agreements, and he'll provide an overview of the outcomes achieved through our partnership. To close out the presentation, I will discuss how the research has helped the water boards move forward on California's recycled water goals and guide us through the next steps for the recycled water program. Next slide. We know that recycled water is a critical resource for California to both diversify our local supplies and to improve the state's long-term water resilience. In 2018, the State Water Board adopted an amendment to the recycled water policy, which includes numeric and narrative goals for the use of recycled water. Broadly speaking, the goals focus on increasing the volume of recycled water use statewide, increasing reuse in areas where groundwater supplies are threatened, and increasing reuse of wastewater that would otherwise be discharged to the ocean. Additionally, in August 2022, the California Water Supply Strategy, Adopting to a Hotter, Drier Future, established new 2030 and 2040 goals for recycled water. For water recycling, the strategy sets goals of recycling at least 800,000 acre-feet of water per year by 2030 and 1.8 million acre-feet by 2040. The strategy also directed specific recycled water actions for the State Water Board, such as acting on direct potable reuse regulations, formalizing a strike team to identify and resolve permitting and funding obstacles, and working to identify future recycled water projects. The most recent volumetric annual report of wastewater and recycled water in the state, as well as a tally of planned recycled water projects, show that we are well on track to meet the 2030 goal. But significant investment and coordinated efforts from state and local agencies will be needed to overcome impediments to recycled water projects to achieve the 2040 goals. Next slide. The State Water Board is working to address challenges that agencies encounter when planning and developing recycled water projects. For example, there is always a need for additional funding, such as for infrastructure needed to develop new projects, pipelines, or to maintain or upgrade facilities. To address this challenge, we have the Water Recycling Funding Program to be able to provide financial assistance through grants and loans to support recycled water development, and we'll talk more about this program on the next slide. We also have regulatory requirements to protect public health and the environment. And we have the strike team who is actively working to resolve permitting obstacles, as well as an addition of several new staff dedicated to permitting recycled water projects across the regional boards. We also recognize that there are data gaps and technical challenges, such as improving brine disposal and treatment options. For these challenges, the State Water Board funds high priority research through the Recycled Water Research Program. Next slide. Circling back, the Water Recycling Funding Program provides technical and financial assistance to agencies and other parties in support of planning and constructing recycled water projects. Since January 2020, the Water Recycling Funding Program has provided approximately $1.7 billion through the state revolving funds, voter-approved bond funds, and general fund appropriations to 56 projects that could produce and deliver an estimated 275,000 acre-feet per year of recycled water. When establishing the guidelines for this program, there was recognition for the need to identify and fill knowledge gaps in recycled water research in order to promote California's sustainable production and use of recycled water and to inform management priorities. So, a small portion of the funding streams have been allocated to the Division of Water Quality's Recycled Water Research Program to strategically support high priority research. Next slide. The State Water Board's Water Recycling Funding Program set aside approximately 3% from funding from 3 voter-approved bond funds and 3% of loan repayments from bond-funded water recycling construction loans to fund recycled water research and development projects. These allocations have equated to an investment of 11.9 million for research grants since 2000. Our approach is to partner with organizations to strategically leverage our small amount of funds, and our grants with the Water Research Foundation are a perfect example of this, with their ability to leverage State Water Board funding through in-kind contributions and in identifying additional funding partners for our projects. California has benefited greatly from the network of national and international research expertise used by the Water Research Foundation to prioritize research topics and to select projects for funding. This has ensured that our dollars are going towards the highest priority topics in water recycling research in California. And the Water Research Foundation does this by utilizing a research advisory council composed of industry experts to prioritize research needs annually, and a competitive bidding process to identify the most qualified international experts to conduct the research. The Water Research Foundation also assigns each project a project advisory committee to guide the research and provide peer review of the deliverables. Next slide. In 2017, the State Water Board allocated 4.5 million for recycled water research to the Water Research Foundation. The first 1.4 million of these funds were used on 5 projects to support the development of direct potable reuse regulations. And the remaining 3.1 million went towards an agreement we executed in March 2018 for 20 projects to advance potable and non-potable reuse in California. To select projects for these agreements, the Water Research Foundation conducted 3 rounds of research identification and prioritization using subject area experts in different areas of water recycling research, which staff then prioritized by California's specific research needs. As of March 2024, all research conducted through these grant agreements has wrapped up, and you can access the final reports through our program webpage or on the Water Research Foundation's website. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Gravatt now to tell you more about the significant achievements of this partnership and California's role in advancing recycled water research nationwide.
Thank you so much. It's both a pleasure and honor to be here with you, Vice Chair D'Adamo and members of the board. And thank you so much for that introduction. It's a delight to be able to summarize the remarkable partnership that we've had with the state of California, who's really driving the future of water recycling, not only, of course, in the state of California, but around the nation and around the world as well. So if we go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So this slide just summarized very briefly what we're about at the Water Research Foundation, which is really focused on improving the quality of life for people and communities across the nation, around the world. And we're focused on providing high quality, safe, and accessible and affordable water services, and doing that by delivering actionable, and actionable, a really important word for us, actionable water research. Tools that can be directly deployed to support things like the action you took to approve the regulations in December of 2023 for water recycling in California for potable reuse. So if we go to the next slide. So this slide is our engagement dashboard for 2023. And there are a few things that I want to point to here, and then I'll focus primarily on the water recycling. So we're largely supported by water utilities, consulting engineers, and manufacturers. They cover about 75% or provide about 75% of the funding we have for water research. And then about 25% comes from federal agencies and departments, the state of California, private foundations. And that makes up in total over $81 million of research that we have under contract today. That certainly covers water recycling and a vast number of other priority areas. 264 projects active at the end of 2023. One of the things I'd like to touch on in the slide is on the left side, underneath the number of utilities, you see the most viewed research project pages. We track very carefully where people go on our website, what questions they're asking, what they're looking for. Number 1 on that list is PFAS and Risk Communication Toolkit for PFAS, which is not a surprise. Number 2 is a project now several years old that's focused on residential end uses of water. Really important data set to help to support conservation activities. We just launched a project to update that data, focusing for the first time on multifamily housing. and understanding that so many of the lower income populations around the country live in multifamily housing. And we hope that this updated study is going to be able to help us get better at understanding equity concerns related to water use across populations. A couple of other items I'll touch on there briefly are a project on nutrients, tremendously important in California and across the country. And then also a project that's focused on greenhouse gas reductions in the most viewed website resources. Number one was on greenhouse gas reductions. And we just this week contracted a new project that is in partnership with research organizations in 7 countries around the world, focused on developing emission factors for water utilities and also for distributed water use projects. And so we're so excited about this, and we know this is a big priority. The last thing I'll point to on this slide on the right side, the most popular webcast in 2023 was one focused on microplastics, so an area of growing interest. If we go to the next slide, this is where I'll focus now on the water recycling partnership we had that we're so excited about. And as Cindy mentioned, just wrapped up the second of 2 grants. This slide summarizes the projects under the first grant, 5 projects, really looking at a number of critical aspects that the state of California selected in terms of where we should put our resources that you provided. Tools to evaluate quantitative microbial risk and plant performance reliability. There's a mouthful. Those tools, QMRA tools, are now provided on the State Water Board's website. Okay, measuring pathogens in wastewater, trying to understand in raw wastewater, untreated wastewater, what are the pathogen loadings? Critical information to understand what sort of log reduction values are necessary. You supported the development of the world's most robust data set of pathogen levels in raw wastewater, collected over 14 months, 5 different utilities all across the state of California. Nowhere in the world is there as a robust data set as what you have generated through the Water Research Foundation. And then a number of other projects also, including not only on the pathogen side, but understanding chemical peaks. We know that in water recycling processes, on occasion, there are breakthrough chemical peaks. And so this tool is really helping us to understand how to track what's happening there. And then lastly, looking at analytical methods. So if we go to the next slide, which summarizes grant number 2, as Cindy noted, you all drove the selection of the 20 projects that we focused on here. And they cover every aspect of potable reuse and also non-potable reuse, including agricultural reuse, addressing barriers to water reuse. And then on the potable side, everywhere from source control all the way through implementation of projects. And it was wonderful to hear the presentation from Monterey One Water on the CalVal project, which we're so excited to have a partnership with NWRI, with Monterey One Water, with Water Reuse California, really to focus on how do we implement these tools now that you have approved. And one other point I wanted to make on this slide is that while you invested tremendous funds, $4.1 million, through our process, we were able to leverage those dollars to greatly increase the scope of research that was possible. So ultimately, the total research value is $8.8 million, in part through support from Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, who put in $975,000, and a number of other entities, plus in-kind research contributions. So if we go to the next slide, please. California has really driven the way that our portfolio of water reuse has been shaped over time. And so this slide shows different types of water reuse projects: potable, non-potable, indirect, direct, and then more general potable. And on the right side in particular, you see starting around 2016, the increase in potable and direct potable reuse research. That is because of what the state of California contributed. And you were driving towards having a strong science basis for your regulations. And if you click on forward on this slide, you'll see first, the data from the drought, which was just raising the profile of the importance of focusing on water recycling. And the next click, you see, so here's SB 918, which really kicked off the focus and investment in research. In the next click, you see the DPR initiative that Cindy was mentioning going back to 2012. That funded a tremendous amount of research that we were able to build on by gathering $6 million from water utilities across the state of California. And then the last one, the last click, AB 574, and actually I think I skipped one more click, there you go. And you see the grants that came through. And so all of these steps have really shaped the portfolio of water reuse research that we have. If we go to the next slide. So where we are today in terms of the research portfolio we have, we cover not just treatment issues, but monitoring, implementation, risk assessment, public engagement, resource recovery, economic issues, workforce, decision-making, and energy. It's really a broad portfolio, which will continue to shift over time, particularly as we move towards implementation. And if we go to the next slide, please. So, and then last year, we had a wonderful event hosted by the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, where we had, you see this great crowd of folks, including many professionals from the state, as well as utility professionals. Our folks, Julie Minton, helped to organize this event. And you see that we're not just finalizing research reports. We have 100 publications that have been developed, 7 webcasts, 5 web tools. So it's all about moving this information into a format where it can be used by utilities across the state of California and around the world. And just a couple more slides. If we go to the next, please. Really interesting step here is that US EPA posted a solicitation just a couple years after you all got into funding the work that we were doing, and we were able to jump right into this project, advancing safety and reliability to protect public health, focused on surrogates for water reuse applications for viral loads. And that built directly on a project that you funded. So we had the project team there, EPA post this solicitation, and here we get $1.1 million to greatly expand the work that you funded. So another big success. And the next slide, please, is a slide that summarizes a grant, $3.2 million grant that US EPA funded, looking at unlocking the nationwide potential of water reuse. And you'll note on this slide that we have more utilities, 42 utilities participating, but 9 in the state of California. No state's better represented in this project than the state of California. But you see how water reuse is spreading across the country, but California really is an anchor for helping to demonstrate how this can be done safely. And then if we go one more forward, just so back to you, Cindy.
As Dr. Gravatt has highlighted, this research performed through these agreements has advanced the body of science on potable and non-potable recycled water applications across the country. And when I reflect on what this research has accomplished, we see that it has filled information gaps to support the development of direct potable reuse regulations. It has synthesized and updated knowledge on critical water quality topics, such as constituents of emerging concern and pathogen monitoring and control. And we have improved recycled water technology and treatment options and created tools and resources to support recycled water implementation. These projects have also highlighted impediments to achieving recycled water goals and identified potential future research areas. Overall, this work exemplifies the importance and impact of recycled water research and demonstrates how research can be an effective tool to continue to promote recycled water in California. Next slide. While the Water Research Foundation grants have wrapped up, we still have 2 active grant agreements that are continuing to address research needs and improve recycled water implementation in California. These agreements include a grant with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project for research to develop and standardize bioanalytical screening tools for recycled water and other water quality applications. And we also have a grant with the National Alliance for Water Innovation for research to lower the cost and energy of desalination for reuse applications. These agreements will wrap up in June 2024 and November 2025, respectively. And SWRCB will be hosting a public workshop on June 21st to share the findings from their research. And you could reach out to our team for more information on how to attend. Next slide. And looking forward, the water boards will continue to support research to address technological challenges in research areas for recycled water projects, such as around brine management, constituents of emerging concern, or treatment technologies. But our funded research agreements are just one tool that we are using to equitably support the development of recycled water in California to meet the ambitious water supply strategy goals. We are also continuing to work to achieve our 2030 and 2040 goals by funding construction and planning grants and loans to support the development of new recycled water projects, identifying and addressing impediments to those projects, and by resolving permitting and funding obstacles through the recycled water strike team convened as part of the water supply strategy. Next slide. If you have any questions on the Recycled Water Research Program or our funded projects, I've listed my contact information on this slide, as well as the link to our program webpage and the State Water Board's webpage for work concerning the water supply strategy. Likewise, if you have any questions for the Water Research Foundation, I've also listed the contact information for Julie Minton, who has overseen the State Water Board grants. The Water Research Foundation's website also has a dedicated page for our grants where you could download the final reports to our projects or explore the web tools that were referenced today. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Last thing I'll say is thanks again to the great support and leadership of the State Water Board and all the staff who've been just so wonderful to work with on this project. And we see there are lots of opportunities to build on this work and bring more research to bear in the future, depending on the priorities that you all establish. So it's really been an honor to be able to participate with you in this.
Greatly appreciated our partnership with the Water Research Foundation.
Thank you. That was just, there's a lot there, and we're really appreciate that you've taken the time to join us today. Thank you for the update. Questions? Board Member Morgan.
I just wanted to just take a moment to say thank you for, this really important update. And, there's a lot of important work that's going on here, and it's really nice just to have an update on just the critical work that is occurring. And I also really wanted just to call out slide 11 and appreciate that there's actual links to the, the most viewed projects and the resources. So I really do appreciate those links being there. And so really looking forward to being able to just dive in and, just should also visit those pages and, and look at that research and the projects. So thank you for including those.
You're welcome. And if any particular questions come up later related to those projects, Julie will be happy to help support those. There is a lot there. And so it's a very exciting time.
Well, I just, again, want to thank you. And it just strikes me, we're so focused on California. And so looking at the big picture nationwide, I really appreciate that as well. I do have one question on slide 12, if we could bring that up. The project evaluating analytical methods for detecting unknown chemicals in recycled water. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, it's a really important area of research. And we talk about non-targeted monitoring and trying to understand what tools can we create to help us identify things that we just might not know are there. And one of the challenges that I think we're going to experience going forward is that the power of our analytical tools is growing so rapidly that we will often find ourselves in the situation where we will be able to identify the presence of something before we understand the toxicological significance of it being there. Does it create a risk to the population or not? But a very important part of this is being able to have tools that can help us to identify things that we aren't necessarily looking for, but know might be there. These sorts of tools in a very different context were used in the state of North Carolina. I know you all have been very focused on PFAS issues. So in the Cape Fear watershed in North Carolina, US EPA used some non-targeted analysis tools to look for what was present in the watershed. And they found a PFAS compound called Gen X that nobody was talking about. Gen X. Turned out there was a manufacturing plant in the watershed that was releasing Gen X into the watershed. And that led to now a significant investment in Cape Fear to remove that compound. And so these sorts of tools can help us, get a handle on what we might not have been looking for previously. They don't answer all the questions for us. They don't tell us whether we need to be concerned about something, but they at least can direct us to where we need to do some additional looking.
I think that's really helpful. It ties it all together to, trust in the system and removing barriers, and having these additional tools can really help to address those concerns. All right. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here today. All right, now we'll move on to item number 5, and then we'll take a break after item number 5, if that's all right, to Division of Water Rights on a proposed order setting aside multiple water quality certifications. Morning.
Good morning, Vice Chair Diadamo and members of the board. My name is Stephanie Postal, and I'm an attorney in the State Water Board's Office of Chief Counsel. I'm joined by Erin Ragazzi, an Assistant Deputy Director in the Division of Water Rights. Today, I'll be presenting on Agenda Item 5, a proposed order setting aside multiple water quality certifications. Next slide, please. I'll begin with some background on the United States Environmental Protection Agency, or US EPA's recent interpretation of Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, reconsideration on the board's own motion, and Section 401 water quality certifications, or just certifications for short. Then we'll provide an overview of the proposed order, a discussion of the notice issued by the board and comments received on the proposed order, and finally, minor updates to the proposed order. Next slide, please. In September 2023, US EPA published new water quality certification regulations accompanied by a preamble. In the preamble, US EPA replied to commenters who recommended allowing certifying authorities to issue certification decisions without a pending request for certification. In response, US EPA expressed its disagreement and stated, quote, "For purposes of Section 401, EPA does not agree that a Clean Water Act Section 401 certification can be issued in the absence of a project proponent requesting certification for a federal license or permit that may result in any discharge into waters of the United States," end quote. This was the first statement by US EPA on this particular issue. And the proposed order being considered by the board today is in response to this new interpretation. Next slide, please. The board's water quality certification regulations provide it with authority to reconsider certifications on the board's own motion. The board must provide notice and an opportunity to submit information and comments prior to taking a final reconsideration action. This involves providing notice to applicants, the federal agency, and interested persons. Here, the federal agency is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. FERC, the applicants, and others were provided notice on March 11th when the board issued a notice of opportunity for public comments and board consideration of proposed order. The board's water quality certification regulations also discuss potential actions on reconsideration, which include setting aside a certification and taking appropriate action. Next slide, please. As an overview, Section 401 of the Federal Clean Water Act requires an applicant for a federal license or permit that may result in a discharge into waters of the United States to provide the federal licensing or permitting agency with a certification stating that the project will comply with water quality requirements. Hydropower project licenses issued by FERC are one type of federal license that generally requires the applicant to obtain a certification. Section 401 provides that certification conditions become conditions of the federal license or permit. It also prohibits the federal agency from issuing a license or permit if the certifying authority denies certification. Section 401 requires the certifying authority to act on a request for certification within a reasonable period of time, which shall not exceed 1 year. A certifying authority is often a state agency, and in California, the legislature has authorized the State Water Board to take certification actions. As relevant here, the board has delegated this authority to the executive director. Next slide, please. In light of US EPA's new interpretation, the proposed order sets aside 3 certifications issued by the State Water Board's executive director under specific conditions. Specifically, they were issued without a pending request for certification, where the board had previously received a request for certification, which had either been denied or withdrawn, and the project proponent was still actively pursuing a hydropower license from FERC. The proposed order would set aside 3 certifications for hydropower licensing. The first for Merced Irrigation District's Merced River and Merced Falls hydroelectric projects. The second for Nevada Irrigation District's Yuba Bear hydroelectric project. And the third for Turlock Irrigation District and Modesto Irrigation District's Don Pedro and LaGrange hydroelectric projects. Next slide, please. The proposed order would also dismiss pending petitions for reconsideration of those 3 certifications. It would do this in order to avoid the unnecessary expenditure of resources. The proposed order is limited to a single issue, specifically whether Section 401 allows the board to issue a certification without a currently pending request for certification. In other words, the proposed order does not take any position on any other issues, including those raised in petitions for reconsideration or litigation. The proposed order takes no action on the certification for hydropower licensing of Yuba County Water Agency's Yuba River Development Project or the pending petitions for reconsideration of that certification. If the board adopts the proposed order, it expects to receive requests for certification for the affected projects. And indeed, on April 15th, the board received requests for certification from Merced Irrigation District for the Merced River and Merced Falls projects. Next slide, please. As previously noted, on March 11th, the board issued a notice of opportunity for public comments. The draft proposed order was posted on the board's website, and written comments were due on April 9th. 5 comment letters were received, which I will briefly summarize. The first two were from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, or CDFW's Region 4. They pertain to the Merced projects and the Don Pedro and LaGrange projects. CDFW Region 4's comments acknowledged US EPA's new interpretation and support the issuance of new certifications with conditions previously recommended by CDFW. Merced Irrigation District also submitted comments supporting the proposed order setting aside these three certifications, including the July 2020 certification for the Merced projects. Merced commented that the proposed order would conserve public resources, including Merced irrigation districts, and that it looks forward to a collaborative relicensing process with the board. A joint comment letter was received from the Modesto Irrigation District, Turlock Irrigation District, and San Francisco Public Utilities Commission. These entities agree with the proposed order's conclusion, setting aside the certification for the Don Pedro and LaGrange projects. They look forward to promptly consulting with the board on a path forward if the proposed order is adopted and the certification is set aside. The last comment letter was submitted jointly by a group of 13 conservation organizations. The conservation organizations support the proposed order and note that it will resolve delay and uncertainty. They support the expedited issuance of future certifications following the receipt of requests for certification and recommend certification conditions consistent with their previous comments. The conservation organizations also request that if the board adopts the proposed order, that it promptly communicate its decision to FERC and request that FERC direct the applicants to request certification for the affected projects within 30 days. Next slide. Thank you. Finally, I'll discuss the minor updates to the proposed order. These updates were reflected in the draft order, which was linked to today's board meeting agenda. This was posted on April 26th. The first is that project background sections were updated to reflect recent events that have occurred since March 11th. Grammatical errors and legal citations were corrected. And finally, a footnote was added discussing the scope of the proposed order. In particular, footnote 2 on page 2 notes that the proposed order does not address the issuance of certifications for classes of activities or express any opinion on procedural requirements for general certifications. This concludes the presentation. Staff recommend the board adopt the proposed order and are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Postal. Any questions before we go to public comment? All right, so the first commenter we have is Cindy Charles, California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm Cindy Charles, board member of the California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance and the Tuolumne River Trust. I would like to comment in support of the state board's proposed order setting aside water quality certifications. We are hopeful that the order will lead to clarity regarding many issues that were previously contested in various petitions for reconsideration and pleadings in state court. Since the board issued the water quality certification for the relicensing of Merced Irrigation District's Merced River Project and Merced Falls Hydroelectric Project, a significant problem occurred in 2022 with the lower Merced losing connectivity for several months. CSPA and Friends of the River sent a letter on January 8th, 2024 to the board about our concerns of the lower Merced dewatering. The National Marine Fisheries Service and the California Fish and Wildlife Department sent letters to the board about this problem in the fall of 2023. On January 16th, Mr. Eric Oppenheimer of the board sent a letter to NMFS writing the board is evaluating methods to maintain a year-round connected river to the confluence with the San Joaquin River as part of ongoing efforts to update and implement flow requirements for the Merced River. As the board works to reissue a new water quality certification for the Merced River projects, this is a potential venue for a resolution of a long-standing and difficult problem of the Lower Merced being completely dewatered. Enforcement actions alone will not resolve dewatering in dry years. Under its Clean Water Act authority, the Water Board can order sufficient flows from the projects to make sure the Merced is connected to the San Joaquin River system at all times. A comment letter on this proposed order from the California Fish and Wildlife Regional Manager dated April 8th, 2024 writes that additional downstream flow compliance requirements are important for the protection of in-stream flows to the entire Merced River and into the San Joaquin River. I urge you to look into this matter as you develop a new water quality certification for the Merced River projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Charles. Next is Chris Schutz, California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance. Good morning.
Good morning, Vice Chair Diadamo and members of the board. Chris Schutz for California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, or CSPA. CSPA supports the proposed order that would set aside the certifications for the relicensing of the Merced River, Merced Falls, Don Pedro LaGrange, and Yuba Bear hydroelectric projects. This support is consistent with the support letter submitted to the board on April 9th by CSPA and 12 other conservation groups. At considerable trouble and expense, CSPA and several NGO partners have consistently stood with the board before FERC and 2 federal courts of appeal in defending the board's authority to issue these certifications. We are continuing to do so. On the whole, CSPA supports the certifications as previously issued. Our support of setting the certifications aside is based almost entirely on the need to assure appropriate process so the certifications are legally defensible. An exception, of course, are our substantive issues raised in the NGO petition for reconsideration of the Don Pedro and LaGrange certification. We respectfully request that the new certification for those 2 projects line up the June flow, that the board flow requirements with the flow requirements for July through October 15th, that the board wisely adjusted upwards in its 2021 certification. We also request clarification of the quantity of large wood placement that the certification requires. In this regard, we appreciate the April 8th, 2024 letter of Ms. Julie Vance, Manager of California Department of Fish and Wildlife Region 4, consistent with these requests. The 2023 Biden rule for the implementation of Clean Water Act Section 401 will require some changes in the certifications for the projects in question today. Notably, it is our reading that the rule places some limits on the board's ability to amend certifications in the future. On the one hand, this is a good opportunity for the board to make decisions now and not defer them. On the other hand, this aspect of the rule will require some careful revisions of previously formulated conditions. CSPA has reviewed the comments of the licensees on the proposed order as well as the petitions for reconsideration by various entities and legal briefs filed in state court. As stated in comments on the petitions for reconsideration, CSPA opposes and our supporters, in fact, support the efforts of the licensees and their supporters to collaterally attack Section 401 of the Clean Water Act. The board should continue to defend the breadth of its Section 401 authority, consistent with case law in Jefferson PUD number 1, American Rivers number 1, and SD Warren, as well as with the Biden rule. CSPA notes that the foot dragging in the initiation and completion of CEQA to support certification for these various licensings and certifications appears to be ongoing. The board will need to navigate that procedural deficiency by licensees. As stated in our written comments, the threat of waiver of certification for these projects continues to be a clear and present danger. Therefore, the board should not hesitate to proceed under Water Code Section 13160B2 if each respective licensee has not completed CEQA by the time the board is prepared to issue a new certification for each project. Should the board approve the proposed order, CSPA and colleagues will request meetings with board staff and council to discuss the issues raised today and related matters. Thank you for the opportunity to comment. We recommend that you approve the proposed order.
Thank you, Mr. Schutz. Next is Thomas Berliner with the Merced Irrigation District. Good morning.
Good morning, Vice Chairman and members of the State Water Board. This is Tom Berliner on behalf of the Merced Irrigation District. I do want to take a moment to address the lower river drying up and point out that when flow releases leave the control of the Merced Irrigation District, they have met all standards that are applied to it, including agreements with various downstream water users that have senior rights. So what we know from that is there are other people that are diverting the water. It is not a shortage on the part of Merced ID. As noted, we are one of the petitioners seeking appropriate process when it comes to having our 401 certification issued. This has implications for litigation in the future, which can be avoided and puts us back in a proper process with the Water Board. We would like it if the board would please direct staff to work with us to achieve an acceptable water quality certification that will not require further legal effort thereafter. As you're well aware, these become conditions to a FERC license, and we are looking at a number of complex issues associated with the Merced River, but not unique to it, and are looking forward to receiving a certification that lets us work in the future in this ever more difficult water environment in California. We also request that the Water Board not use the 401 certification process to address Bay Delta water issues. Those are two entirely separate processes founded on different bases of law. It's not appropriate to consider what the effects of a FERC license might be on Bay Delta when the FERC license is increasing flows, not decreasing, and the scope of the review for a water quality certification is limited to the effects of that license on downstream water quality and really is quite independent of and has really nothing to do with Bay Delta water quality standards. Thank you very much. Oh, and I urge, of course, acceptance of the recommendation of staff to discharge Merced ID's water quality certification.
Thank you, Mr. Berliner. Next is Sarah Badaro, California Sports Fishing Protection Alliance.
Hello, sorry, thanks. I only needed to speak if my colleague Chris Schutz didn't get the opportunity to before he had to leave for another meeting. So I'd like to pass my time to the next person. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And the last person that we have signed up is Kiko Mertz, Friends of the River. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Vice Chair Diadamo and members of the board. My name is Keiko Mertz, and I am Policy Director of Friends of the River. Thank you for the opportunity to comment in support of this proposed order this morning. Much of my comment is repeated from the joint comment letter of conservation groups in response to this proposed order that we submitted in April. Friends of the River, alongside our partner organizations, has been intimately involved in the relicensings of these hydropower projects. importantly, suing to prevent waiver of the board's authority to issue the water quality certifications on these projects. We've also collectively invested significant effort in advocating for protective water quality conditions for inclusion in these certifications. But given the need for certainty and closure in the relicensing of these projects, Friends of the River supports this proposed order. We believe it will also resolve delay and uncertainty bound up in the pending appeal before the California Court of Appeal. In addition, we support expedited issuance of future water quality certifications for these projects following board receipt of requests for certification. And we just request that new water quality certifications are consistent with previous comments by Friends of the River and our partner conservation organizations, especially those mentioned earlier by my colleague, Chris Schutz. We also request the board quickly communicate its decision on the proposed order to FERC in the appropriate dockets, and that the board ask FERC to order licensees to request certification for these projects within 30 days. Lastly, and I'll repeat another point by my colleague Chris Schutz, we believe that the threat of waiver on these and other projects is serious and ongoing. As an example, Nevada Irrigation District is actively seeking waiver on the Yuba Bear project. As my colleague stated, the board should not hesitate to proceed under Water Code Section 13160B2 if each respective licensee has not completed CEQA by the time the board is to issue a new water quality certification. We look forward to the opportunity to review and provide input on the new certifications for these projects. And I just want to thank you all again for the opportunity to provide our thoughts this morning.
Thank you, Ms. Mertz. All right. I'd like to turn it over to staff to see if you have any comments or anything further to add in light of the comments.
I will just say, should the board adopt the proposed order today, we do plan to file the order with FERC shortly on all the project dockets. And we look forward to the opportunity to work with the applicants, NGOs, and all interested parties as we proceed with processing any future certifications.
All right, thank you for that. And then could you also comment on the issue of, that was brought up by a couple of commenters about threat of waiver because of CEQA not being completed?
So this is something that we are looking into, and we will know more about as we proceed with the certification process. As mentioned, in each of the cases for these three projects, the board is a responsible agency and the applicants are the CEQA leads. In each case, the applicants have not publicly initiated any sort of CEQA process, and so the board does not have a CEQA document on which to use in its certification process. That being said, we will see how things evolve in the coming year. We have the Merced application before us, and we'll see if we receive future ones and what the status of CEQA is. As we approach the one-year deadline, we'll have to look at what the threat of waiver is at that time to determine whether it's appropriate to proceed with issuing certification without the CEQA document or taking a different action, such as denial.
All right, thank you for that. And of course, it's project specific, so we'll stay tuned. Any questions or comments? All right, I'll just say thank you. I just want to thank you, the whole team, executive on this. It has been an interesting last couple of years. It's been a bumpy ride with a lot of twists and turns. And I think we're all looking forward to some greater certainty in the process going forward. So thank you for the development of this, and just want to turn to my colleagues to see if anyone would like to make a motion.
I'll make a motion for item 5.
I'll second.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll. Board Member Morgan, seconded by Board Member Firestone.
Board Member Morgan. Aye. Board Member Firestone.
Aye.
Board Member McGuire
Aye.
and Vice Chair Diadamo.
Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you. And item 5 is adopted. All right, now we'll take let's take a 15-minute break. Looking at the clock, I can hardly see. We'll come back 5 after 11. Continuing with our item 6. Are back. Now we'll hear from, on item 6, Division of Financial Assistance regarding revisions to the ranking methodology and funding prioritization for the site cleanup and sub-account program. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning, Vice Chair Diadamo and members of the board. My name is Ben Henningberg, Supervising Engineering Geologist and Cleanup Accounts Section Manager for the Division of Financial Assistance. Joining me today is Joe Karkowski, Deputy Director, Division of Financial Assistance, Craig Sanchez, Water Resource Control Engineer and Site Cleanup Sub-Account Program Unit Chief, and Mercy Ryer. She is an attorney with the Office of Chief Counsel. We will be presenting proposed updates to the ranking methodologies and prioritized funding plan for SCAP, the Site Cleanup Sub-Account Program. As noted in the agenda, this board is a workshop item, so please feel free to ask comments. Next slide, please. So this is our list of our workshop topics today. First, we'll go over the background. We'll touch on 2 general types of work described in SCAP grants. We'll also go through grant requirements, recent and ongoing funding commitments, annual funding projections, and coordination and outreach efforts related to the proposed updates. We'll also take a look at the adopted ranking methodology and resolution 2023-11, including the 3 general categories of scored data and information. We'll go through the details for recommended scoring updates and recommended funding updates, and wrap up with a summary of proposed ranking and funding revisions. A little brief background. Next slide, please. Site Cleanup Sub-Account Program was established by the Health and Safety Code, and it allows for the State Water Board to issue grants for reasonable and necessary costs associated with projects that investigate the source of surface or groundwater contamination and or remediate the harm or threat to harm to human health, safety, or the environment caused by existing or threatening surface or groundwater contamination. Next slide. So here before you, we have our grant requirements. So a site must be subject to a regulatory directive or order or be in the process of having an order issued. Must have responsible parties, must lack sufficient financial resources to perform the required work. And I'll just say that our Office of Chief Counsel and our Financial Authorization Section coordinate efforts with lead agencies during the ability to pay evaluations to ensure that correct responsible parties are named and required financial information is submitted in a timely manner. Typically, 3 years of tax information is needed for an ATP evaluation. Public agencies who are not RPs may also qualify for a grant. Some of the funding factors that we consider is whether the location is in a small or disadvantaged community. A small community is a municipality or an unincorporated community with a total population of less than 10,000 during the most recent census data. A disadvantaged community is defined as a median household income of less than 80% of the statewide median household income. We also consider the degree to which human health, safety, and the environment are threatened by contamination. We look at the cost and potential environmental benefit of the cleanup, whether there are potential sources of funding, and other information the board identifies as necessary for consideration. These 5 items provide the structure for a professional decision-making process when evaluating projects to determine if continued SCAP funding of subsequent phases of work at the project site are consistent with the program priorities. Next slide, please. So we have great news for the applicants. Since November 2023, DFA has made funding commitments for just shy of $40 million to fund 17 grants and 15 contracts throughout the state. Next slide. More good news. Currently, DFA is funding a total of 49 grants and 25 projects. So that's 75 active SCAP projects. Each one of these projects has gone through a lengthy project and grant or contract development process and is now actively managed by one of our 8 grant managers, composed mostly of licensed geologists and water resource control engineers. These numbers only represent projects where the funding requirements for grants have been met and where, after considering the fund factors, funding for subsequent phases of work at the project site were approved. I should note that up to 40% of the grant applicants, never receive a grant, primarily because 1, they failed to submit tax information in a timely manner. They have a full ability to pay. They don't accept the ability to pay amount, or they withdraw their application. Next slide, please. So in this slide here, you shows the active project phases. As you can see, there's 72% of the projects receive grant funding to conduct site investigations, shown as SI, and interim remedial action, shown as IRM. Examples of site investigation tasks would include groundwater well installations for the assessment of groundwater contamination, impacts, threats, and potential plume extent in groundwater, the collection of soil vapor, and indoor air data to assess the magnitude of the release and any potential or existing complete exposure pathways. The primary goal of this task is to characterize the extent of the plume in groundwater, soil, and air so that remedial action can be implemented as needed to remediate the impacted media. Examples of IRM would include a short-term, less than full-scale trial run of one of the remediation methods. For example, air sparging, soil vapor extraction, multi-phase extraction, or in situ remediation. The primary goal of these tasks is to implement a less than full-scale trial run of the proposed remedy to evaluate its potential to mitigate and remediate impacted media under full-scale operations. The remaining 28% of the projects receive grant funding to conduct remedial action tasks. Examples of these tasks would include excavation and removal of contaminated soil, in situ remediation using reagents and injections, soil vapor extraction, and multi-phase extraction. The primary goal of these tasks is to remediate the impacted media using full-scale remedial action. This also requires ongoing monitoring and periodic reporting. One thing I just want you to consider is that long-term implementation of interim remedial actions for the primary purpose of mitigating human health risks may reduce human health risks in the short term, but in the long term, they're likely to be more costly because they are not specifically designed to remediate impacted media. Next slide, please. So now we'll talk about the proposed funding projections. Current comprehensive and fundable lists were based on grant applications, information, and data received prior to April 2023. Currently, we have 131 new submitted applications, and I have to note that we can only process applications that have been submitted by the grantee. There are well over 100 incomplete applications in the FAST database. Most of the incomplete/unsubmitted applications lack the information or data needed to support the issuance of a directive by a lead agency. There are 144 projects on our fundable list. 12 projects have been issued ineligibility letters for one of the reasons stated earlier. It is important to note that these projects remain on the fundable list. Of the 144 projects, 62 are legacy projects. These projects have previously received funding. These projects are noted with an asterisk in the resolution. We have 82 potential new projects. These projects have not received any funding, but have ranked high enough to be considered for funding. Next slide, please. Okay, moving forward here, as we begin the process for developing the comprehensive and fundable list for FY 24-25, we reached out to our Office of Public Participation and the Site Cleanup Program Managers in the Division of Water Quality, DWQ. Based on feedback from DWQ and several lead agencies, we drafted an updated ranking methodology and potential funding update. The proposed updates were presented for consideration and feedback during lead agency coordination meetings in February and a stakeholder group meeting in March. 5 main comments that were takeaways from those meetings were, and I'll just kind of give an example of what was said. There is a concern that the SCAP ranking methodology does not rank projects with elevated concentrations of tetrachloroethene PCE or trichloroethene TCE and vinyl chloride in indoor air as the highest priority for funding. The commenter disagrees with the weighting given to the disadvantaged community and small community and environmental justice scores, which could increase the ranking of a project with the lower screening level concentrations of the same contaminants and impacted media to a ranking above a similarly impacted project and a non-DAC, non-small community, or non-EJ location. We did not offer a remedy for this comment. Secondly, there was a request for additional screening levels to be considered when screening levels or maximum contaminant levels were not available. We agreed with this comment and have proposed an update to the scoring to include the scoring of contaminants based on a formal Tier 1 public notice. There was a request to score impacted water supply wells beyond 2,000 feet when there's a direct line of evidence indicating that the impact is tied to the project. At this time, we will not include wells beyond 2,000 feet in the scoring, and it is likely that projects with plumes greater than 2,000 feet may be candidates better suited for the US EPA Superfund. There was a request for scoring of EJ quartiles to be adjusted not to provide points to projects in the 0 to 25 quartile. DFA agreed with this suggestion and proposed an adjustment to the scoring of the quartiles from, you would get a 0 score from 0 to 25. You would get 4 points from approximately 25 to 50. You would get 8 points from 50 to 75 and 12 points from a score of 75 to 100. And lastly, there was a request that additional points be given to projects with multiple sensitive receptors, i.e. residences, daycares, schools, and hospitals located within 200 feet of a project. DFA decided not to make any changes to the SCAP ranking methodology in response to this comment. Awarding additional points for multiple sensitive receptors would cause an imbalance in the scoring and overweight the sensitive receptor criteria. Next slide, please. In this slide, we have the adopted ranking methodology, which includes how we score our projects. So we have a quantitative score of maximum of 50 points. Some of the categories we consider are the human health, safety, and environment. We refer to this as HH&E, and that comes out at a maximum of 24 points. Small community designation of 2 points. Disadvantaged community. And all three of those together are a maximum of 12 points. Those two together is a maximum of 12 points, and there's a total of maximum of 14 points. The environmental justice, there's a maximum of 12 points allowed. We also consider qualitative factors, including cost and potential environmental benefit of the project and other sources of funding. Next slide. Before you, we have our scoring criteria. As mentioned earlier, the three main categories of scored criteria are HH&E, small community, disadvantaged community, environmental justice community. The scored criteria for each category is shown. So we look at the groundwater, indoor air. We also score the hazard and cancer risk associated with indoor air. We also look at threat to water supply wells and surface water. Under the small community or disadvantaged community category, we look at the size of the community, whether in a small community is defined as less than 10,000, population of less than 10,000, and also a medium household income. We look at the MHI. And lastly, we look at the Enviro Screen 4.0 score. Next slide. Okay, there's a lot of information here. So now we get to our recommended HH&E scoring updates. So during the November 2023 board meeting, it was brought to our attention that the scoring ranges for groundwater data included a point for projects with no data or contamination concentrations below screening levels. The screening level ranges were updated so that sites with no groundwater data or contamination concentrations below screening levels would not receive a point. So that was pretty straightforward. Based on an internal review of environmental screening levels used by the San Francisco Bay Regional Board, we are proposing that soil vapor data be added as a scored criteria under the HH&E category. Soil vapor data will be used to help characterize the extent of the plume. Based on the internal review of environmental screening levels used by the San Francisco Bay Region Board again, we are proposing to modify scoring for impacts and threats to water supply wells and surface water by increasing the proximity to the number of impacted drinking water supply wells and surface water. By increasing the proximity, we will provide additional points for projects near impacted drinking water supply wells and surface water if the source of the impact can be clearly tied back to the project. Recommendation 4, based on the internal review of the draft environmental screening levels issued by DTSC, we are proposing that the sensitive receptors be added as a scored criteria under the HH&E category, including scoring for sensitive receptors I mentioned earlier, which were residences, daycares, schools, and hospitals. We will provide additional points for projects in areas zoned for high density and mixed use. High density areas are typically urban areas with buildings that have a large number of units. Mixed use projects may have any combination of housing, office, retail, medical, residential, commercial components. Conversely, a project located in an area zoned for light or heavy industrial would not likely to have sensitive receptors nearby and would not receive additional points. Next slide. Recommended EJ scoring update. As mentioned earlier, DFA agrees with the suggestion to adjust the scoring for percentile quartiles, and I talked about that earlier. Next slide. Now we'll touch on recommended funding updates. Our proposed prioritized project funding plan includes 3 lists. Previously funded projects. This is meant to provide funding for high-scoring previously funded projects and provide limited funding for critical juncture tasks at other previously funded projects. The second list will be new projects, funding of approximately 5 new projects per fiscal year. And the third list will be contract projects. A limited number of funding will be available for 1, new contracts to identify RPs, and 2, contracts to conduct response actions. Next slide. In the previous slide, I mentioned critical juncture, so I want to explain what this means. The critical juncture review takes place anytime we are looking to continue SCAP funding of a subsequent phases at a project site. Before a recommendation is made to the DFA Deputy Director, we review in great detail the following items. The degree to which human health and the environment are threatened, we call that risk management. The project's small community, disadvantaged community, and environmental justice scores, and the cost versus environmental benefit of the remedial action. Next slide. Recommended ranking methodology updates. So we are recommending the minimum H&E score and minimum threshold H&E score of 10 is proposed to ensure that DAC and EJ communities with no to minimal health risks are not considered fundable. There would be an exception for TCE detected in air above accelerated response actions. Next slide. As part of our process for proposing updates, we wanted to get an idea of how the updates would impact scores going forward. So we pulled data from 20 of the highest ranked projects that have not received funding, and we looked at the outcomes. 5 of the top 10 projects in the current fundable list remain in the top 10. Projects with the highest small community, DAC, and EJ scores still rank the highest. Minimum HH&E score for these projects increased from 9.5 to 16 points. This increase is attributed to the soil vapor data and sensitive receptors. Projects with the highest soil vapor concentrations with threats or impacts to water supply wells or surface water and located close to sensitive receptors also scored very high. Next slide, please. Okay, so here we have the summary of proposed ranking methodology revisions. So under the HH&E category, we're looking at adjusting the groundwater screening levels so that projects with no data or contaminants below screening levels would not receive any points. Soil vapor was added as a new criteria, and we combined groundwater and soil vapor score to a maximum to cap them at 15 points. Indoor air scoring of TCE screening ranges were updated and combined indoor air hazard and cancer risks in a maximum of 5 points. Next slide, please. We also made some adjustments to the threat to water supply, surface water, and sensitive receptors. Sensitive receptors are defined, as I just talked about earlier. Residences, daycare, schools, and hospitals were added as a new criteria. The distance to scored wells and surface water has been doubled from 1,000 to 2,000. Threats to impacts of water supply wells and surface water within 2,000 feet will now be scored. Projects with greater than 10 supply wells within 2,000 feet will receive 3 points. And threat to water supply wells, surface water, or sensitive receptors, the scores were capped at 4 points. And we did that so that we can maintain the balance of points overall for the scoring that I talked about earlier. Next slide, please. Some more of the proposed ranking methodology revisions include for a small or disadvantaged community, we are still in the process of considering whether to change the existing weighting given to small communities. Percentile ranges were updated to eliminate overlapping range values. And we're still considering whether points should continue to be given to small communities. Please note that the slide section is in the wrong color. So the consideration, that first consideration should be in the darker area. Under environmental justice, the percentile ranges were updated to eliminate overlapping range values. Points were modified so that the lowest percentile quartile will receive 0 points, and the points for the 3 remaining quartiles were adjusted accordingly so that the quartiles will receive 0, 4, 8, and 12 points respectively. Next slide, please. In order to make the fundable and comprehensive list more clear or easy to read, we are proposing 3 lists. The first list would include previously funded projects. Previously funded projects. We're calling this our new list. The second list would be the FY 24-25 SCAP comprehensive grant project list, which includes the FY 24-25 SCAP fundable project list, which are the existing but modified to remove previously funded projects. And the third list will be the SCAP comprehensive contract list. We would also establish a minimum HH&E score. As mentioned earlier, a minimum HH&E score of 10 is proposed to ensure that small communities, DAC and EJs with no or minimum human health risks are considered fundable. Excuse me, are not considered fundable. Lastly, we're looking at ways to limit the number of projects on the SCAP. Next slide, please. Lastly, we're looking to limit the number of projects on the SCAP fundable grant project list. A shorter list will set realistic expectations for the number of new projects which may receive funding during the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. Given our $34 million annual budget, this is our proposed funding plan for FY 24-25. We plan to fund the next phase of work for 10 to 20 project sites, provide grants for 3 to 5 new projects, and have our contractors work on another 5 to 10 sites. Looking ahead, we have a placeholder for the August 6th, 2023 board meeting. During that meeting, we'll provide a SCAP update, propose revisions to the SCAP ranking methodology, and propose adoption for a project list for 24-25. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Hanningberg. All right, any questions? Well, I just really want to thank you. Last year was really interesting when this came before us. And I think we, had a good discussion at the board level, but I really appreciate you all taking the time to really look at this thoughtfully and consider, especially you made several comments about not wanting any one criteria to, cause an imbalance. And so, just really looking at the pros and cons of different approaches. So thank you so much for that. And thank you for the really detailed presentation. Be prepared for a motion. Oh, you have a question?
I think it's just a workshop.
Oh, what am I? Thank you. It's a good thing you're sitting next to me.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you for the presentation. And clearly you've put a lot of thought and work and care into the revisions that you're proposing. And I know this is a workshop day. So, and you've been meeting with stakeholders, and I appreciated all the, clearly you've done the outreach. I don't know that there maybe are any commenters today. And perhaps that shows a little bit on the work that you've done up front to get input and share some of that today. So thank you for that. And I don't have any concerns to share with you today about the criteria revisions, but I did want to emphasize that I really appreciate the revisions to kind of right size, if you will, the fundable list and put it into the categories so that we're really setting clear expectations for project proponents, even though we know there are lots and lots of projects out there and the need is great. On the flip side, our funding is limited. And so I think it's really important for us to be as clear as possible to set expectations for RPs and others who are impacted, but nonetheless, we just don't always have the resources to spread to all those projects. So thank you. I think, an approach like that is going to be helpful to everyone in the long run. So appreciate those changes.
Thank you for the reminder that it's a workshop. Thank you. Board Member Firestone.
Yeah, I'll also echo the thanks. I think really happy with how this program is evolving, and it's nice to have a really concrete action following up on the racial equity resolution in terms of an action plan, in terms of looking at how we're prioritizing our resources to try to address racial equity disparities. And so I think this is continuing to evolve, and we've got really great input. One thing as we're considering before we finalize, and I know I've talked with Board Member Morgan and staff about this, but is just that I am interested in thinking about how we're incorporating and to what level there are points for small communities versus larger urban communities. And so I think, sort of sharing that concern with the public and other board members, since we're not, this is the time we can share that. Because this is, different than when you have an economy of scale with a water system. This is really about the RPs or lack of RPs. And I think in this case, I'd want to understand how points for rural communities, basically, or essentially really rural communities, might not best reflect the need and may not advance how we're looking to address some of the racial equity disparities. I know there's a huge need in urban areas and limited infill and housing sites. And so, anything we can do to just understand how that plays out before we finalize is appreciated.
Yeah, thanks, Board Member Firestone. So the small community number of points the board gave for small community consideration was 2 out of the total of 50. So we can certainly look at whether that's determinative, changing that. But the other thing to consider is we are proposing consideration of potential impacts on wells. And, we have that number we had is a high number, so that you're not going to see that high number of wells in a urban setting, right? You're not likely to have 10 wells within 2,000 feet that are, production wells. So that would suggest that, that factor will most likely come into play in more small rural areas. So if the other board members want to weigh in on this, that's one aspect of the scoring where smaller communities, there's already sort of an implicit consideration, right? There's in terms of that factor that we're including. So we can certainly kind of look at how it, what it would look like, what the fundable list would look like if we were to, go from 2 points to 0 points for small communities, so that you have that information before making a final decision.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I know there is a statutory need to consider small communities, but I think, like you said, that's a great point that they're considered through that, or one of the ways that they could be considered and are being prioritized is through the concentration of number of wells. And so maybe we don't need a small community points as well. But anyway, just food for thought. I think as we're interested in public comments on it, really appreciate the really intentional work and a really important program. I wish we had 10 times as much funding or more. So appreciate all the work.
Okay. Any closing thoughts?
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate the feedback, and glad we're in a different space than we were a year ago. But that's to me the great thing about the board process. You get that feedback and you adjust, and we appreciated your guidance along the way in November, as well as having us engage with the stakeholder advisory group. I think that's been very valuable. It's been a great forum to work through these issues.
Exactly. All right. Thank you. And we'll see you at the next step. All right. In August.
Thank you.
Not today. All right. Thank you. Okay. Now we are on to our final items. Board member reports. Board member Morgan.
I do not have a report.
Neither do I.
Neither do I. I know this is, let's see if.
Calendars have been full working on other items.
Great.
Okay. Now we'll move on to our last item, Executive Director's Report.
And I don't have anything to highlight this month either.
Okay. All right. And as I mentioned earlier, we are not having a closed session. And so we will, this concludes our meeting and we are adjourned. Our next board meeting will be May 21st, board meeting, and Salton Sea on the 22nd. We'll see you then. Thank you.